us a bit more about these specific warnings from the police, because they are talking quite openly about the intelligence that they've received.
Yes, well, this was all said at a meeting of the Northern Ireland Policing Board on Thursday, at which point the Assistant Chief Constable Bobby Singleton had told the Policing Board, which is a board made up of political and independent members, that they had what he called community intelligence, that there was going to be an attempt to lure police in to an attack in Derry on Monday, when a group calling itself Sura, which is widely believed to be linked politically to the new IRA, one of the dissident Republican groups, traditionally has a march. These are marches that take place all across Northern Ireland over the weekend in commemoration of the 1916 Easter Rising. They are almost entirely peaceful, and this is the only one that would be considered contentious. Last year, there was clashes between police and young people after this march. What's different this time is the police are saying that they believe that those young people will be used to lure them in by getting involved in street disturbances, and then there are plans to attack police. They didn't say whether they thought that might be in terms of an improvised explosive device or shots being fired, but it's very rare. I mean, I can't remember a time in the past when police have told us what intelligence they have about an attack before it's taken place like this.
Indeed, and they are talking about the expectation that police officers will be the target, which, of course, they have been on previous occasions. But are there signs of increased security over this weekend, particularly as, of course, events have already been taking place to mark the anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement 25 years ago?
Well, so the major security operation that's in place at the minute is preparing for the arrival of US President Biden on Tuesday. And a lot of his personal security is carried out, obviously, by his own Secret Service. His cars have already arrived here in Northern Ireland, those big armoured vehicles, which we're told can withstand all sorts of missile attacks. They're already here. Police provide backup to them. The dissident Republicans who remain active, they tried to shoot a police officer earlier this year. Their attacks are sporadic, they're very small in number. It wouldn't particularly be of benefit to them to launch an attack around President Biden, given the fact that Biden is a friend of Ireland and their cause is apparently one of a unified Ireland. But what they do know is that with a presidential visit comes a travel and press pack. International press from all around the world are arriving in Northern Ireland. First of all, for the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, it's 25 years on Monday. Obviously, Good Friday has passed, but the official date was the 10th of April. They're arriving for that and also to cover the presidential visit. So any attack, no matter how small or sporadic that attack is going to gain massive amounts of publicity. And for those dissident Republicans, that's all good propaganda. So you can see how they're trying to exploit the situation that we're in at the minute in order to obtain maximum publicity for their actions.
Yeah, and we've had the overall terror threat level in Northern Ireland raised too. And it is a reminder, isn't it, that at a time when everyone is considering the significance of the Good Friday Agreement, which of course caused two communities to come together and commit themselves to purely peaceful means of pursuing their political goals, there has always been this continued threat from dissident groups.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too pessimistic because I come from an area of West Belfast that was very heavily impacted by our conflict, and relatives of mine were murdered during the Troubles, and so the life that my children led was very different to the one I led, and that was all because of the Good Friday Agreement and the positivity that that has brought. And there is a real feeling of change in Belfast city centre, especially. You can really see that. Just this week, I was speaking at a tourism conference of the amount of people and the cruise ships and everything coming to Belfast. But what did happen, and I do think that that's a political failure, is that in terms of some pockets of Northern Ireland, where there was real disadvantage economically, because it's no accident that the areas where we have high levels of dissident Republican activity or even loyalist paramilitary activity are the same areas where there may not be the same opportunities for those young people, and therefore they become very easy prey to older people to groom them into those gangs, to give them something else to look at rather than to face obviously a future that may not look very prosperous in terms of their employment opportunities. And if that had have been addressed early on, and the political imbalance that still existed within some communities and others, I think that we could have kept a lot of those young men out of those organizations.
Yeah.
When people think of dissident Republican groups, they still think of like the real IRA, the Oma Bomb, those disgruntled former provisionals who didn't support the peace process. That's no longer the case. Those people are long since gone. We're dealing with groups now, the leadership of which are probably men in their 40s, and the membership are people in their late teens and early 20s.
This, of course, all comes at a time that we still have no functioning government or assembly in Northern Ireland. Haven't had one for over a year. Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, which is refusing to go back into the power sharing arrangement, has said he doesn't think that the political vacuum is behind the violence. But surely the lack of a real properly functioning, devolved institutions does make it more difficult to address some of these problems that you've been talking about.
Yes, because we did have a strategy. There is a tackling paramilitarism strategy that was put in place, but that does require nurtured by ministers and government departments to sign off on where those funds will go and who they'll benefit, to try and really target, especially those very young men who are vulnerable from those grooming gangs. And they have done some really good work, but at the same time, too, now we have no ministers. And also, it's very easy if you're someone of a dissident Republican persuasion, of an armed, violent Republican persuasion, and you're trying to tell young people that don't become involved in politics to air your grievances because politics have failed, come with us instead. And so that failure of politics obviously has a knock-on impact. It's having a knock-on impact in terms of public services and everything else. The issue is that the DUP are refusing to go back until their issues with the protocol are dealt with. They're still not happy with the Windsor framework, which was the latest deal negotiated with the EU. They know the EU is gone. They've left the negotiating table. They're not coming back again. As far as they're concerned, Brexit is done and dusted. They're trying now to put pressure on Rishi Sunak and the British government to put some domestic legislation in place to try and air their grievances. And their supporters are still in favour of that, because I work for the Belfast Telegraph. We did polls quite recently, and the majority of Northern Ireland want the Assembly up and running and want those politicians back at work.
Okay.
But the majority of DUP voters are still supportive of that staying out policy.